Thank you very much for all the introductions and all. Honorable Vice Chancellor, Dr. Rao, Dr. Shelishri, Purnima, all the deans of faculty, the faculty members here on the audience, and students. Also, Dr. Karad and the family. It's my great honor to be with you on this particular day. I feel rather embarrassed when Dr. Rao talked about Dr. Masheka. He is a mentor to all of us, including me personally. And whenever I have any sort of questions, difficulties to ask, I always approach Dr. Masheka, and he is ever ready to help the cause of Indian science and technology and CSR in particular. Many of you are aware that CSR was founded in 1942 as perhaps the first publicly funded organization in science and technology perspective, and it was before independence. And therefore, India's rise in science and technology across the world post independence has been closely linked with the evolution of CSIR itself. And I was very deeply honored a few months ago, maybe a year ago, when I came to Pune at the MIC World Peace University, and you actually honored me with an award, which I cherish very much. At that occasion, I had a chance to tell you that CSIR was the one when we had to make sure that the democracy is installed in India and every citizen gets a right to vote. We developed the indelible ink that is put on our fingers, and that is now being used even today. And as I said, continuing with that journey, whether it be the rationalization of all the calendars in the country, whether it be making pesticides during the Green Revolution, or whether it be making the first tractor in the country, that is the Swaraj tractor in the country, CSR has been involved in all the S&T-led growth of the society that continues even today. And I feel extraordinarily privileged to be at the helm of the affairs of CSR on this particular day. Now, the topic that has been given to me has been the challenges that we have faced during the COVID period. And what I would like to actually begin by saying is that the kind of time that we have seen in last about 1.5 years has been absolutely extraordinary. I don't think any one of us ever thought that in our lifetimes we will face a situation such as this. I mean, that we have actually heard many times over. We were aware, people involved in public health and all, that 1918, 1919 Spanish flu was very devastating. I mean, India had taken a big hit in that time, but nobody had ever thought that during our lifetimes that we will have situations such as this to face ourselves. And therefore, as the society, as much as the society, as much as the leadership and the entire world of science and technology and health across the world was kind of caught unawares. That would be correct thing to say. Although we knew that the pandemic is around the corner in some form, we did not know in what form it will appear and how to tackle it once it appears. And that's exactly what has happened in the last 1.5 years. What I would like to do is I would like to take CSR as an example and what initiatives CSR took in this pandemic. But towards the end, I will also talk India is general country and Indian science and technology fraternity, what it has done. So CSR only serves as an example, but Indian science and technology fraternity actually has done remarkably well in this particular period to try to find out solutions to COVID-19. And those of you who would have heard Prime Minister's address on 4th of June to CSIR Society would recall how proudly he said that in the past, whenever India faced any problems in technologies or developing science, we always depended on the Western countries to provide us those technologies. And he said, there is one thing that we have seen during this pandemic is that we have not depended on the West for providing us with science and technology, but rather we have worked shoulder to shoulder in providing technologies to the world. And he was very, very proudly mentioning this. Those of you have heard, those of you have not heard, please do take a moment and listen to Honorable Prime Minister's address, which is available on YouTube. He spoke at the CSR Society meeting. He happens to be the president of CSR Society, and he was recounting very gloriously contributions of the entire India science and technology in this particular respect. So let's move ahead. I will tell you a little bit about CSIR's initiatives during this particular era. And what you see here is a timeline on the left-hand side. The timeline is such that India's first case of SARS-CoV-2 virus. So all of us know that we call it COVID-19 now, but the virus itself is called severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2. This 2 is attached here because there was an outbreak of SARS-CoV-1 in East Asia, sometimes about 15 years ago, and therefore this actually turns out to be coronavirus 2. The first case in India was reported on 30th January 2020. Although around the world, many countries had started reporting cases by then. For example, in US, the first case was reported on 7th January. In China, the first case was reported in the end of December, and it was established that this disease was due to this particular virus. Now, as it was becoming clear that this might be a disease that might spread faster, I had an opportunity to visit Pune for a function of the Firodia Awards. I was very privileged to receive Firodia Award last year. And when I was at the Bal Gandharva giving my talk in acceptance of Firodia Award on 7th February 2020, I already mentioned just 7 days after the first outbreak of SARS-CoV-2 that what we are staring at is a very grim situation. A situation that looks extraordinarily concerning, and that unfortunately came true a few months later. In the meanwhile, CSIR has had a tradition that we have annual directors meetings of all the 37 CSIR laboratories. And last year's meeting took place on 25th and 26th February in Goa. And this was much before WHO had declared it as a pandemic. So in this meeting in Goa on 25th, 26th February, we had an opportunity to deliberate on the issues if the SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 it is known now, were to become serious, what would be the strategy of CSIR to tackle it? As luck would have it, on 11th March, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 as a global pandemic. The rest, of course, is history. India announced the first lockdown on 24th March, and CSIR rolled its strategy for dealing with COVID-19 on 29th March, when we held our first, what we call as the COVID strategy group meeting in the evening at 6 o'clock on this particular day. Since then, for about 6 months, every evening the CSG group would meet every evening at 6 o'clock and discuss and design strategies to deal with COVID-19. Now, coming to the challenges of leadership. A leadership in any organization has to assess what are the challenges and unmet needs of a particular situation. And leadership has to assess what kind of spectrum of expertise exists in the organization to meet the national emergencies or even global emergencies. Once on one side, you have the understanding of the challenges and unmet needs. And on the other side, if one can actually assess one's own strengths, then in that case, a strategy can be rolled out for meeting these unmet needs. And that's what exactly what CSIR did. So the challenges and unmet needs were very obvious when we started. We had very little diagnostic capability and capacity. There is no point of care diagnostics. There are no vaccines as of March 2020, no therapeutics. We knew that the virus is highly infectious. We knew that it causes respiratory failure, and the biology of the virus was unknown. When we assessed our strengths, we knew that CSIR is very strong in genome sequencing platforms and in bioinformatics pipelines. We knew that we have very deep expertise in diagnostics. We knew that we are the ones who have literally catalyzed the generic pharma industry's growth in the country. We have expertise in medical devices, and we have huge capacity for R&D in infectious diseases. Keeping these 2 points in mind, we rolled out our strategy to meet with these unmet needs and the challenges. Let me tell you that one of the first diagnostics of RT-PCR along with NIV Pune was rolled out from the Center for Cellular Molecular Biology in Hyderabad, CCMB Hyderabad. And simultaneously, we started training people in doing RT-PCR. At that time, only 2 centers in the country were doing RT-PCR, and very quickly on today's date, we have roughly about 2,000 such RT-PCR centers in the country. And a large number of people have now been trained to do RT-PCR diagnostics. In our strategy, we designed our strategy based on 5 different verticals. One was surveillance, one was diagnostics, one was repurposed drugs and vaccines, one was on hospital devices, and the last one was on logistics. And I don't want to spend too much time coming to each of the verticals, but let me just give you some of the successful examples that we have been able to do. One of the first challenges was RT-PCR is an expensive thing. It requires a machine to be bought, RT-PCR machine to be bought at an extraordinary price. RT-PCR reagents are not necessarily available, and therefore we concentrated ourselves on bringing some innovation in this particular aspect, and we devised what is called a CRISPR-Cas9 based COVID-19 kit. You know, a CRISPR-Cas is something which is very contemporary, and only 3 companies or 3 rather groups in the world who have been able to devise a CRISPR-Cas based diagnostics for COVID till now. One of them is in MIT, Massachusetts. One of them is University of California, Berkeley. And the third one, of course, is CSIR. And the institute in CSIR is the Institute of Genomics and Integrative Biology. From the beginning of COVID-19 dealing with issues and bringing out technologies, we were very clear in our mind that if our technologies were to be successful, we must have 2 important ingredients. The first important ingredient was we would work very closely with private companies in India, because commercialization and scaling up of all the technologies is very easily done by the companies. That's number 1. Number 2, we were also very clear that all the raw material required for making these technologies available should be available in India. So this is number 2. So the raw material and the ability to work with private companies is what we actually started with. And the CRISPR-Cas based technology, what we call as Feluda, Purnima will actually connect with Feluda name very clearly. Many others, and there are many others who would connect with this name, Feluda.
Yes, sir.
And this is now been manufactured by Tata Medical and Diagnostics. It is manufactured, it is marketed as Tata MD Check, and we are recommending to large organizations such as Army, Navy and all, who have many people coming to work on a particular day, also at the airports and other things, and also in many universities and colleges and all. When you have influx of a large number of people, if you have people having 10,000 people coming onto campuses every day, then you can have actually this test kit available there. Tatas will be more than happy to actually install this as a mobile van in the campuses. The current capacity in a mobile van to do is anywhere between 3 to 10,000 tests a day, and across the country is about 10 lakh tests they can do in a day. It was successfully deployed during Kumbh Mela and can be deployed in mobile vans. The other innovation that we brought in was the dry swab method, in which this is the same RT-PCR that what we do, what you read in the newspapers, but the samples are collected dry, not in what we call as the viral transfer medium, and then we don't need to extract the RNA, and we can do RT-PCR directly, and it saves the cost by about half, and it increases the throughput about 2 to 3 times. So this is great, and this has been manufactured now or marketed by Apollo Hospitals, by Spice Health, by Merrill Diagnostics, and so on and so forth. Also, the CSIR labs actually then started in supporting diagnostics across the country. In many corners of the country, such as in Assam, Jorhat, such as in Jammu, such as in Mysore, there were not facilities to do RT-PCRs very easily. And what I've shown here is a photograph of this aeroplane, was the aeroplane carrying all the equipment and apparatus to Leh, Ladakh. And in Ladakh, of course, when there were no facilities, our lab people went there and set up the facilities. And what you see in the photograph is that all the instrument and equipment is being loaded into this Air Force plane, which was taken to Leh. And our scientists are now working very actively in Leh to do testing there using RT-PCRs. We also put in place a very strong surveillance program. I will come to that a little later. But one of the highlights of our surveillance program is carrying out sero survey across India. And we have a cohort of about 10,000 people. Cohort means we have a group of 10,000 people who actually participate in the sero survey. And we do this, we derive samples from the same people, same 10,000 people at a regular frequency. And at this moment, we have been doing about every 6 months for these 10,000 people. So we have done the sero survey twice till now at a gap of 6 months. And the third sero survey is just going on as we speak today. And the sero survey essentially tells you whether one person has been infected with the virus in the past, how much immunity exists in the population, and if there are vaccinated individuals, what level of immunity is there in these people. And some of these papers have been published in leading journals internationally. And as I said, the third sero survey, which is happening right now, is very unique in the world. For the first time in the world, the same group of 10,000 individuals are being assessed for the level of immunity they have achieved during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's the first in the world kind of thing. There have been many sero surveys done, but they have been done on random individuals. There are many sero surveys which have been done at a gap of 3 or 6 months, but they have not been done on the same individuals. In this case, the same 10,000 individuals are being tracked for development of immunity against COVID-19. And we are very eagerly looking forward to the results of this sero positivity. As you can see clearly, last year when we conducted sero survey in August, September, the total sero positivity across India was about 10%. And when we did it 6 months later, in February, March this year, the total sero positivity had risen by 28%. What was alarming for us is that even then, we saw the states like Kerala here. If you see the color bar here, the yellow ones are less seropositive and the dark ones are more seropositive. And also, as you can see, many states have actually very high seropositivity, but states like Kerala had very low seropositivity. And that caused a concern to us. And we informed the state of Kerala that there is likelihood of a major outbreak in Kerala in the coming time. And indeed, what we saw in the months following, that there was an outbreak of Kerala. Kerala, just like Maharashtra, were affected very seriously. And we proposed to both the states of Kerala and Maharashtra that they must undertake genomic surveillance of the virus immediately. What is genomic surveillance? Genomic surveillance is that from every district, we collect samples and sequence the virus which actually is going through in that particular district. And that gives us an insight into whether any new mutants are responsible for the outbreak in those districts. And that's how we discovered the first variant of Delta in Maharashtra. When we are sequencing samples in Maharashtra, we realized that in Amravati and Yavatmal, there was a variant that looked much different than the prevailing variant, what was then called as UK variant. It was much different than that. And we initially called it B617, B1.617, but now WHO has renamed it at Delta. And after we discovered Delta variant, we very quickly saw the Delta variant was spreading across very rapidly in the state of Maharashtra. And unfortunately, it's not only Maharashtra, Delta variant has literally taken over entire India today. So Kerala and Maharashtra, but Delta variant is now spread across India at this stage. And that's what genomic surveillance actually tells us, is emergence of mutants across different things. But we also undertook different kinds of other surveillances. I have told you about sero surveillance already. We also took surveillance of sewage samples. In 8 different cities, including Pune, we are carrying out sewage surveillance regularly. Our institute in Pune, the National Chemical Laboratory, all of you know it as NCL, has been doing the sewage sampling studies regularly. And very early on in the studies last year, about 7-8 months ago, we estimated that about 6.6% of population of Hyderabad were infected. And that was the result of the sewage sampling. We also do air sampling. We have devised new equipments, the first of their kind in the world, in which we can collect air and tell people whether there is virus floating in that air. As all of you know, that the virus essentially spreads through airborne particles, and therefore we need to be very careful if the air has suspended particles entrapping the virus. And if that were the case, we have now devices which will clean that particular air. And as all of us know, many of the viruses, bacteria, fungi can be killed by UV light. And therefore, we have now carried out experiments and shown that indeed UV lights, when they are installed in the air ducts, in the ACs, air conditioners, or the air handling units, they can serve as very effective disinfectant system. And I have personally written letters to all the directors of IITs and NITs and other places, ICERs and all, that this must be installed in their lecture halls and all, if the lecture halls and all are indeed air conditioned. In many of the conference halls and all, if UV light such as this is installed inside the HU, it reduces the probability of transmission significantly. And we have come out with guidelines on ventilation of buildings and all. And I'm very happy to say that Government of India has now issued these guidelines on how buildings and all should be ventilated, whether it be residential buildings or whether it be workplaces. And if we follow this kind of guidelines of ventilation, once again, we are at lesser risk of transmission of the virus. I am emphasizing again and again, the virus primarily spreads through air. And as long as the air is dissipated and the concentration of those droplets which carry virus are very low in air, the probability of transmission is very low, or probability of spread is very low in a population. And we must therefore have a combination of all these methods, such as ventilation and disinfection of air ducts across the places. We also worked on vaccines and drugs. A large number of clinical trials that we have undertaken, of which this particular drug is already in the market. We worked with Cipla for this. This is called Favipiravir and is being marketed by Cipla under the trade name of Ciplenza, and it carries a logo of one of our labs, the Indian Institute of Chemical Technology, Hyderabad, and this is now available across the country. But as we speak, a large number of clinical trials are going on. The clinical trial of Umifenovir is almost complete. The clinical trial of Sepsivac is almost complete, and other clinical trials are at this stage are near completion or are going on extremely well. As far as the hospital devices, we also devised non-intubation type ventilators, non-invasive ventilators, what we call as Swasth Vayu. What was earlier called as a trade name was bilevel positive airways pressure ventilator. But these ventilators made by NAL Hyderabad, they are also available in the country right now. And large number of them we have been able to supply the governments of Delhi, the governments of Madhya Pradesh, government of Gujarat, and so on and so forth. So if anyone is interested, these are all available in the market. But we have also made makeshift hospitals and so on and so forth during the process. We also devised methods to generate oxygens in the hospital. And the first of such oxygen generating plants we installed recently at the Aund Chest Hospital in Pune. So what you see here is Aund Chest Hospital in Pune, where the what we call as a pressure vacuum swing adsorption technique plant that has been delivered and installed and is functional. So generation of oxygen, when there was a crisis of oxygen across the country, we very quickly devised technologies so that oxygen can be generated there. And this particular plant at Aund Chest Hospital, I think it generates about 500 liters per minute and can easily cater to about 100 people in the hospital. We also make makeshift hospitals. In the areas where hospitals are running out of space, we have gone to those many areas. Also, we have gone to remote areas in hilly areas such as Himachal Pradesh and all. And in something like 7 to 10 days, we can construct something like 20 or 100 bedded hospitals. And we have successfully shown that in states like Himachal Pradesh. We have successfully shown that in the Delhi, in places like Safdarjung Hospital or Lady Harding Hospital. We have successfully shown that in Punjab, in Bhatinda, and Andaman and Nicobar, that we can go and make these hospitals in literally 10 days. And what you see here, in many of these places, these hospitals are now actively being used by those states where those were actually running out hospital area or hospital beds in those places. These hospitals are fully functional. They have beds, they have ECG machines, they have ICUs, and they also have manifold to take oxygen around the hospital. And although we call it a makeshift hospital, they are good for next 20 years. So if any hospital wants to make it, these hospitals would actually withstand for next 20 years. It's not a problem to do that. And finally, to make any technology successful, we must assess that everything that goes on making that technology, every component, every ingredient that goes on to make the technology is available locally. And for that, we must have a very robust supply chain solution. And for making this very robust supply chain solution, we created a platform called Arya Path. It was launched formally last year in June 12th. And we have actually connected many manufacturers and many customers using this particular platform. It's also available as an app. This was this platform was made based on a very successful app that we have made for the farmers. For the farmers in the country, what we have done, we have taken farmers on one hand and we have connected them with the transporters on the other hand. All of us are aware that whatever farmers produce in their fields, they have difficulties taking that to local mandis and selling them in the markets. And to avoid all the middlemen, what we did, we created this particular platform. It has seen more than 3 lakh downloads till now. It is available in 12 Indian languages and is very successful. And the farmers can now directly contact the transporters in their vicinity, whether the trucks or trolleys or something, and then ask those trucks or trolleys to come and pick up the farm product and go to the market and sell these products directly. Arogya Path has been designed something very similar. So what I wanted to actually tell you at this particular stage is that science and technology is actually a very, very important, has played a very important role in the tackling of COVID across the country and also across the world. And what we are very proud as India's science and technology community is that Indian science and technology community, not only CSIR, IITs, NITs, colleges, universities, they've all come together and fought the battle together. It's very proud to see that multiple organizations like DRDO, CSIR, ICMR, ICAR, DST, DBT, all of them came together and joined hands in fighting the pandemic. It's also very heartening to see that India's industry rose to the occasion and worked very closely with academia, like never before. The interactions between Indian academia and industry have been absolutely phenomenal in this case. Some of the things that I showed you on my slides would not have been possible to install. For example, the oxygen plant that I showed you that has been installed in Aunchest Hospital in Pune, we would not have been able to install that without the help of Bharat Forge or Kalyani Forge in Pune. Mr. Baba Kalyani came ready for help and said that we will help you install this in hospitals, right? The diagnostic kit that we came up of the CRISPR-Cas based, we would not have been able to commercialize that without the help of Tata's. Same way, there are many other technologies that what we have generated, we would not have been able to commercialize them without the help of companies. So what has not been seen earlier since independence is the academia and industry working together to bring very useful solutions to the society. We are seeing a distinct shift in balance in that particular situation today. So the entire ecosystem in the society, on one hand, the academia is represented by IITs, NITs, IICs, ICERs, the national labs represented by CSIR, DRDO, and so on and so forth. And the industry on the other side, all of them together work together and brought very valuable solutions to the society. And that makes all of us very proud. And as I said, the Honorable Prime Minister acknowledged this with great pride on 4th of June, saying that India Science and Technology ने कंधे से कंधा लड़ाकर पाश्चात्य देशों के साथ दिखाया है कि पहली बार आज हम लोगों को पाश्चात्य देशों से कोई टेक्नोलॉजी को आयात करने की जरूरत नहीं थी. We did it on our own. That actually is great pride in all of us that what we have done. So we are very proud of India Science and Technology community. Thank you all very much for listening to me so patiently. And if you want me to address any questions and answers, I'll be more than pleased to do that. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, sir, for indeed an enriching and very incentivizing talk. We actually want to listen a lot more to you, and we have received quite a few questions from our audiences in the chat box as well as the Q&A section. So we would like you to answer a few questions, sir. The first question is, how pharmaceutical industry needs to be reoriented in order to check infectious diseases? Sir, if you can kindly answer.
See, infectious diseases have been with us ever since humanity came into being. Diseases like tuberculosis, for example, there have been records in the old Egyptian mummies and Peruvian mummies that those people had died because of tuberculosis. And they're going to remain with us. This is not the last of the infectious diseases that we are seeing. They're going to remain with us forever. And we therefore have to be prepared to detect any of the infectious disease that might actually arise in future. The pharmaceutical companies have to be open with variety of techniques that can be used to detect what form this disease is taking, what kind of diseases they are. So whether PCRs, RT-PCRs, antigen tests, or any other tests that exist for the variety of tests that exist for detecting the diseases, we must be able to adopt to check the disease in the shortest possible time in any case. And apart from the diseases, we should also be ready to check if emergence of new resistant forms of those diseases are arising. For example, tuberculosis. We have a major problem of multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. In HIV created resistance in a very big scale. And as all of us know, that COVID-19, eventually there will be drugs to tackle with COVID-19. But the virus is so smart that it will become resistant to that. So we have to have the ability of not only detecting new infectious diseases, but we also have to have the ability to check the resistant forms of those diseases. And of course, pharmaceutical industry is very aware of these aspects. Academia is very aware of these aspects. And I'm pretty sure that in any future pandemics or something, the pharmaceutical industry will come up with the detection kits in shortest possible times for those diseases. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sir, since you have shed some light on virus mutating itself, there are a couple of questions regarding the third wave. So the question goes like, are we prepared for the third wave as forecasted? And if yes, what kind of homegrown technology is India trying to adopt for confronting the third wave? Over to you, sir.
Yes, thank you for asking that question. See, these viral diseases like influenza and so on and so forth, we know from history, let us say from 1918, 1919 history, or also in 1970s, there was an outbreak of Hong Kong influenza. We know that they come in waves. And we have seen around the globe right now that even COVID-19 has come in waves in many different countries. So it's inevitable that there will be a third wave in India. Now, the intensity of third wave is difficult to predict right now. Whether it will be as intense as the second wave or not, that remains to be seen. All of us are aware that second wave has actually caused a carnage in the country. We're just speaking that none of us know any person who has not lost a close friend, a close colleague, or a close family member to this particular disease. It has been an absolute carnage. It has been an absolute catastrophe. And whether the third wave will be as intense as the second wave is difficult to predict right now. But we have to be prepared for that. And the way to be prepared for that is to follow the most important thing is to get vaccinated at the earliest. Vaccination is one of the most powerful ways of breaking the chain of transmission. So those of you who are not vaccinated in the audience, I'm going to urge them to go and get vaccinated as early as possible. Secondly, even if you are vaccinated, there's always a finite probability that you might be infected because vaccines are not 100% effective. And therefore, maintaining COVID appropriate behavior, masks, maintaining distance from each other is of cardinal importance. And therefore, people must maintain COVID appropriate behavior apart from vaccination. Both these things, if we follow, we will be actually able to, hopefully, we will be able to reduce the intensity of the third wave. But in terms of technology, what we are doing is that, as I showed you some of the things, for example, the UV solutions that I showed you, we are trying to install these UV solutions across all the air-conditioned coaches in railways. We are trying to do them in all the state transport buses. And if that happens in the next month or two, at least we will reduce the probability of transmission in air-conditioned spaces of those. I have also urged many of the cinema halls, malls, enclosed air-conditioned places that they must install the UVs in their air ducts so that the probability of transmission is low and so that we get better sanitized air which is circulated in these enclosed places. So together, if you follow all this together, we have the chance of reducing the intensity of the third wave as and when it comes. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The next question is a little descriptive, sir. The question goes, have there been any efforts on effecting necessary behavior changes in people that the pandemic requires from individuals immediately? And this question is from the perspective of the problem that people ignore advice, and if nudged with incentives and not just punishments, it may prove well for effecting necessary behavioral changes. So what are your insights on this, sir?
Yeah, thank you for asking that very interesting question. See, as I have said just now, that one of the most effective ways of spreading the spread of the disease is wearing a mask. Now it has been scientifically proven that a person who is infected with the virus would actually spread much less virus encapsulated particles if that person is wearing a mask. Similarly, a person who is not infected, he or she will not get infected if he or she is wearing a mask. And therefore, masks reduce the probability of transmission by as much as 90%. Now, our job, people like us, including all the university professors here, is to teach our students and thereby asking students to spread the message across the society is please do wear masks all the time. Either when you're in public or when in your room, when there are many other people in the same room, please do wear masks. That's the only way to actually reduce the probability of transmission. But now this is a public behavioral question, as was asked to me just now. And we all know that the probability of our getting into an accident and succumbing our life to an accident is much less if we are wearing a helmet during traffic, right? When we are riding a scooter, and if we are wearing a helmet, it is scientifically proven by data that those who are wearing helmet are at a lesser risk of having severe head injuries or even dying of those head injuries. How many people in Pune do we see wearing a helmet? And unless we spread this message that this is for our own good, we are not saying it just out of thin air that do follow this kind of practices. It is for our own good. It's protecting for our own lives. It is protecting lives of our friends. It is protecting lives of our colleagues. It is protecting lives of our relatives. If we have seen the carnage in the month of April and May, we must ensure that kind of carnage does not come once again. If we want to reduce the intensity of the disease in future, we must continue wearing a mask. And as I said, all of us have lost a very close loved person in this particular way, right? All of us, without exception, have lost a very, very close person during this wave. I have personally lost both my parents to COVID in the last 1 month. And that has been very, very actually sad in our family. But that actually puts the things in context that many of us here in the audience, in fact, all of us in this audience have lost somebody very close, loved one to the disease. And therefore, it is our collective responsibility to wear masks. And if we don't wear masks, and if there are people who are not wearing masks in public, we may even not hesitate pointing out to those people that it is not healthy not to wear a mask. So let us make it a practice to wear a mask in public or when there are people around us. Thank you for your question.
Thank you so much, sir, because we really cannot go ahead with ignorance is bliss anymore. And all these preventive measures are really very important. So, sir, the next question is, could you please elaborate on the recent findings about the Delta Plus variant?
Okay, thank you. So, as I said, we in CSIR detected a Delta Plus variant. It's also called AY.1. Now, Delta variant, as we know, was originally dubbed as the double mutant in the country. A double mutant is not a very good name to give, but essentially what it said, it had simultaneously accumulated 2 mutations on the surface of the spike protein. You know, the spike protein which exists on the surface of the virus, is the responsible protein that allows the virus to gain entry into our own cells. Now, if we have antibodies against the virus, either by vaccination or by prior exposure to SARS-CoV-2, some of the antibodies would not recognize this mutated region of the virus. And therefore, the virus would still gain entry into our own cells. And therefore, although we are immune to the virus to some extent, the immunity is not foolproof. And therefore, the double variant, as it was dubbed, and then what we called actually in the scientific technical term as B1.617, or now WHO is called as Delta, that was actually which came to our light. We detected at first, as I said, in Amravati and Yavatmal district, but now it has spread all across India. Now, the Delta plus variant is a variant in which another mutation has taken place, which is called K417N, a lysine residue, amino acid residue, has been mutated into an asparagine amino acid residue at the 417th position of the spike protein. Now, Delta plus, there is no evidence that it is more transmissible or it is more dangerous. Like, I mean, it would kill the people more. In fact, the evidence is contrary at this stage. Evidence actually says that it is not spreading that fast. Delta, the evidence was very clearly that it was spreading faster than the strains that were prevalent before Delta. So the Delta spread very fast, and therefore what we have seen, the fact is that in any families, if one person came infected, almost the entire family became infected. And that happened because of the spread of Delta. Delta plus, we don't have to worry too much about it at this stage, because Delta plus is not any more transmissible than Delta, and it's not any more dangerous than Delta.
Okay, thank you, sir. That was quite informative. But sir, if the next wave comes, will the children be more vulnerable to this?
Yes, so this question is being asked by many people. And indeed, people, some clinicians believe that children are more getting infected with Delta itself. But thankfully, what happens is that in younger population, the immunity is kind of good. And therefore, although they are infected, the mortality rate is much less than people who are above 60 or 65. So children, even if they're infected, they're getting better after a few days. The younger population, the college-going students and all, or university-going students, they're also getting infected. But because their immunity is so strong that we don't see as much mortality in that particular population. But at this stage, there is no reason to believe that the mutants who are emerging will selectively affect children more than the older population.
Right. So, sir, the next question talks about the region of Ratnagiri. This district has been identified as a district with highest number of Delta plus variant cases. So, sir, how much are we under threat?
So, as I said, let us not worry about it. We have given our opinion, and opinion is very clear. And then yesterday, those of you who saw the press conference, which was addressed jointly by Dr. Vinod Paul and Dr. Renu Sarup and all, they very clearly stated that let us not worry about Delta plus too much. Indeed, Ratnagiri has seen a few cases of Delta plus, but at this stage, we are not seeing the spread as fast as the previous strains and all. So at this moment, the Delta is there, but the threat of Delta plus, the perceived threat of Delta plus is not justified.
Thank you, sir, for that. That was indeed very comforting. So the next question is, how can we handle the challenge of technology adoption with special reference to the rural India in case of the APP created for framers?
You see, I mean, the rural areas, of course, is more challenging than urban areas in the adoption of technologies and things like that. But this is the challenge that we love, right? I mean, scientists and technologists would like to take up this kind of challenges and make sure that rural people have equal access to everything as in the urban areas, right? Whether it be healthcare or whether it be any other technologies that are required, they are accessible. And that's the challenge that we must address. And we must make sure that nobody in rural areas actually feels disadvantaged simply because of their geographical location. And we should try to see that all the technologies are equally implemented in rural areas as much as in urban areas.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Now, there is a little bit of concern with regard to the vaccination that some people have already gone through. And now there are a few questions related to that, where the first question is, sir, I have taken both doses of Covaxin, but after reading articles on Covaxin, which was not approved by WHO, did we make a mistake by taking Covaxin?
Not at all. Leave all your worries aside. Covaxin's clinical data is now available. They have made a presentation before some very competent people in the country, the Drug Controller General of India, who is a regulatory authority, and people who understand the field have gone through the data and have seen a press release recently that Covaxin's efficacy is something like about 80% or something, 78% or 80% is the efficacy of the vaccine. And therefore, there is no reason to believe that Covaxin is bad. In fact, Covaxin is very good. And if you have taken Covaxin, rest assured that you may be among those 80% people who are completely protected for infection. There's always a chance that you belong to those 20% who are not protected, but that's true for any vaccine. It's not true for Covaxin alone. It's true for any other vaccines that a small fraction of population may not be actually protected. So Covaxin is a very proud development of the country. We should be very proud, and I'm very pleased that you went ahead and took Covaxin. Be rest assured that you are safe by taking Covaxin.
Thank you, sir. And taking that ahead, in continuation, the next question is, after taking 2 doses of vaccination, do we still have a chance of getting infected by COVID-19?
See, the theoretical possibility always exists that you will get reinfected despite taking 2 doses. And in fact, now many cases have come forward, especially in health workers and all, because health workers are continuously exposed to COVID-19. But thankfully, what has been observed now, by and large, is that people who are fully vaccinated and are getting second-time infection of COVID-19, the severity of the disease is much less. And in fact, the mortality is significantly less in the second reinfection, those who are vaccinated. So the clinical manifestations of the disease and the mortality are way less than those who are unvaccinated. Now that has been actually more or less proven, and therefore vaccination seems to have a very positive impact on trying to spread or trying to have worse clinical outcomes of the disease.
Okay, quite interesting, sir. So, sir, at the rate at which the virus is mutating and the population of India being vaccinated completely is still far. So how is the government preparing for this unprecedented peril?
I think this is a question really that the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare should address, because I am aware there might be some journalists here. And let me just assure you from the government's perspective that the government actually has taken extraordinary care and some extraordinary steps in trying to vaccinate as many people in as little time as possible. But the details of the steps that have been taken is possibly Ministry of Health and Family Welfare or their spokesperson would be able to tell you. I just want to assure everyone that the government has been fully prepared to vaccinate people. There are already 3 vaccines which have been approved in India. There's the Covishield that is manufactured by Serum Institute of India. There's Covaxin, which is currently being manufactured by Bharat Biotech, but also now very soon will be manufactured by other industries. And the Sputnik that has received a regulatory approval in India. All the 3 are available, and our duty as general public is to go and get vaccinated as early as possible.
Absolutely, sir. So, sir, if you could kindly tell us whether influenza vaccine for children under 16 years is must in the current pandemic?
So, influenza vaccine, once again, deals with a different kind of a virus. It's the influenza virus. And influenza virus practice, what has been followed in the past, it probably would be continued even now. So whatever has been there, the symptoms of influenza and COVID-19 unfortunately can be similar, and people should not actually mistake the two unless it is diagnosed correctly. You know, the symptoms are very similar. So, and the monsoon, with the onset of monsoon, there are many people who might get infected with influenza, but the final diagnosis must be made before we come to a conclusion whether it's influenza or COVID-19. And whatever practice has been followed in the past can be continued even this year, as far as influenza is concerned.
That's great, sir. Indeed, we are getting all our doubts clarified really well. The next question has a different angle, and it says, how appropriate is it for the courts to interfere in government's handling of corona? If you could kindly answer this.
Well, it's a very, very tricky question to me. The way we have developed our society since 1947, we have two principal arms, and actually both have done some phenomenal work over the years. One is the democracy, where the elected representatives of people essentially formulate policies and implement them for the country. And that has been actually absolutely phenomenal. Our elected representatives, either in the parliament or Rajya Sabha or at a state level, have done some phenomenal work since 1947. If you take ourselves back to 1947, or many of us in this audience take ourselves when we were kids, and today you see so much development that has happened. You know, I mean, as a school children or as a school kid, I recall myself standing in the queue for getting milk for 3 hours, 4 hours. I used to go to ration shop to get rice and sugar. And all the children of my age would stand by me saying that we also went through the same thing. You know, I mean, the new clothes in the house would come only during Dussehra or Diwali or something like that. Many of the people who are of my age would recall that. Things have significantly changed since then. Medicines were not very easily available. They're available now very easily, and so on and so forth. That has been possible because of the policies that have been implemented by our elected representatives. And that has been actually done phenomenally well. At the same time, judiciary also is a very important arm of our society. And at any point of time, anyone feels disadvantaged, and any person feels that within the framework, the person or a group of people or certain kind of aspects are not receiving the same attention as mandated by our constitution, then they actually approach the judiciary, and the judiciary comes in the way and then actually puts in place the correct kind of directs the correct kind of things to be done in that particular respect of in that issue. And therefore, both of them are very, very important arms of our society. They have distinct functions. That is for the press to debate where each other's overlap stops and starts. It is for the constitutional experts to debate what the two actually should do with each other and all. But for us, it is important to remember that both are very important aspects of our society.
Thank you so much, sir. We are indeed honored to have so many questions answered. Sir, if you allow, can we have a couple of questions more, sir?
Sure, no problem.
Yeah. So, sir, the next question is, why healthcare system and medical insurance in India are not synchronized to develop a stronger healthcare?
So the thing is, this question is not specific to India. It's very similar across the world in many different countries. There seems to be some sort of what we may call, not exactly call it disconnect, but some sort of a thing between the health insurance and the health delivery system, healthcare delivery system. It's better in some countries, it's not as good in many other countries. In many countries, the healthcare is completely a state subject, and the state takes care of healthcare of its citizens. So there are different models in many different countries that have been followed. What we are actually seeing is that more and more we will be actually depending on health insurance and all in our society as well. So we are evolving those practices, and I do hope that in future or in very near future, we will have better delivery system as well as better healthcare insurance, so that the two can be connected better.
Thank you, sir. We actually see the nebulous of ignorance fading away. All our doubts that were letting us get in a hazy circle, they're all getting away. But now there is an interesting question for you, sir. Is it possible for educational institutes and universities like MIT World Peace University to receive the DSIR SIRO certificate that can make us eligible to apply for research grants from ICMR and other research funding bodies?
Oh,
your insights.
Yes. Absolutely, yes. Please do. I mean, there are certain guidelines, regulatory guidelines, and as long as you fit those guidelines, please do. If MIT is already not recognized as a CSIRO, I'm actually surprised. So by all means, make sure go to the DSIR website. Just go through all the listed issues, what you have to comply with, and do apply. And we'll try to make our best to see our best that you get the certificate, as long as those compliances are met. And many private universities are actually registered with us. We have given those certificates so that they are eligible to get grants from government agencies. And universities, for example, like BITS Pilani or Manipal University or Thapar Institute, they're all privately owned, privately operated universities, and they do have certification from us so that they can receive grants from government sources. So that's absolutely possible. All you have to do is comply with the regulatory guidelines.
Thank you, sir. And the final question for you today, sir. Recently, Niti Aayog welcomed foreign direct investment in health sector of India. So do you think this is making health services inclusive and more affordable?
So as I see is that Niti Aayog, of course, is a collection of some extraordinary individuals in the country. All of them are they have deep knowledge about their own areas of expertise and all. And if they collectively have thought that Indian healthcare system requires FDIs or participation from foreign players, obviously it has been done with a particular purpose and for the benefit of our people. And I do foresee an exciting opportunity there that many foreign players actually would come and offer some of the best global practices so that our healthcare system also improves along with it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. In fact, our knowledge, understanding has indeed got augmented. We have our leaders giving a huge round of applause, sir. And indeed, I think we are speechless, sir. We are speechless for your patience, the way you have been answering all the questions. I still see questions coming in the Q&A panel, but extremely sorry, apologies to our attendees. We will definitely try to redirect these questions to our distinguished guest, either through mail or as and when possible. So now, moving ahead, I would kindly request Dr. Anjali Sane, the Associate Dean of Faculty of Commerce at MIT World Peace University, to kindly propose the vote of thanks. Over to you, madam.
Dr. Purnima, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Thank you. What a wonderful evening, and I must say an absolute treat for all academicians like all of us. Indeed, a pleasure and honor to have Dr. Shekhar Mande sir among us. All outstanding work, sir, in art as well as in science results from immense zeal applied to a great idea. This is what we have experienced today evening. And on behalf of our founder president, Dr. Vishwanath D. Karad sir, Executive President Shri Rahul V. Karad sir, Vice Chancellor Dr. N.T. Rao sir, all the staff and faculty members of MIT World Peace University, and on my own behalf, I extend a hearty vote of thanks to Dr. Shekhar Mande sir for gracing